This is the EcoFlow RIVER Pro 700, a 720 watt-hour lithium-ion power station that weighs about 16 pounds. I'm going to get to all of the inputs and outputs later. There are no surprises here. It accepts AC and DC input and provides AC and DC output, just like you would expect for any power station in this price range and size. What makes the RIVER Pro 700 interesting to me is its battery management system. It has a quick charge feature that'll take the battery from 0% charge to 80% charge in only an hour from any ordinary 120 volt outlet. It does take up to 200 watts of solar, but that's no use for you when you're in bad weather or you're camping under the trees. That's where being able to quickly charge from grid power becomes such a useful feature. Think about a van lifer dealing with days of overcast skies who might want to top off from grid power while getting a coffee or grabbing some Wi-Fi. They can just show up, plug in, order their coffee, check their email, check Reddit, watch their favorite YouTuber like me, and by the time they're done all that, they can get up to 80% charge or more. They'll have all the power they need at their boondock for running their LED lights, a fan, maybe a heated blanket, or even a CPAP machine while they sleep. That fast charging feature seems tailor-made for the kinds of rolling blackouts that hit Texas for days very recently. It won't power your whole house, but it'll power your modem and your Wi-Fi router. It'll power your medical devices. It could even run a fridge for a couple of hours. Power comes back on, and in only an hour, you can have over 600 watt hours at your disposal again. That is a very big deal. It could take other power stations that are this size that even cost more than this one 6 hours or more to get that much of a charge. And you don't necessarily have that luxury in a rolling blackout or as a van lifer dealing with a lack of access to solar generation. At an MSRP of only $649, this comes in at less than 90 cents per watt hour capacity. That surprised me given its high quality of construction and other available features like integrated Wi-Fi and the ability to control it with a phone app. But I'll get into that later. Let's go through the inputs and the outputs so you can see what this is intended to power. The RIVER Pro 700 has its inputs all under one panel on its left side. You have AC input here, DC input here. You can of course charge from a 120 volt AC outlet, but the RIVER Pro has its power supply internally. That means you don't have to figure out where to put a big power supply brick like required with most power stations. This is actually from the battery for my rad power bikes, e-bikes. It's about the same capacity, but look how big this is. Instead, all you need to do is take this little power cable with you. When plugged into a 120 volt outlet, the onboard converter can push up to a whopping 660 watts in a fast charge mode called Extreme. That's about 4 times the charging rate most power stations this size are capable of, and it'll get you from 0% to 80% charge in only 1 hour. I'm only getting about 600 watts or so right now because its current state of charge and battery temp are a little bit limiting. You can see it actually is lowering as we speak. It's getting close to that 50% point. I've seen 660 watts several times in testing. It's very similar to how my Tesla charges at a supercharger. It'll start out with a very high charge rate, but as the charge level increases, the charge rate is decreased to protect the battery. That's what happens with the RIVER Pro. You get that super fast charge rate up to 80% capacity, then the battery management system tapers off the input power to protect the battery while finishing the charge. That last 20% charge can take another 35 minutes or so, but that still means you're going from 0 to hero in just over an hour and a half instead of 4 or 5 hours. The display even shows you how much time you have left to charge until full, and in testing, I found it to be accurate. Here's another cool aspect of that Extreme battery management feature. The onboard power supply can pass through power to the AC outlets, allowing a peak draw above the 660 watt max charge rate. That means you can still charge the battery at a relatively fast rate, even when you have something plugged in. That is pretty cool. I'm gonna lose my hair dryer here. The River Pro 700 comes with a 12-volt accessory port cable for charging via DC, and you're going to get about 90 to 95 watts of input from that. You can see I'm getting about 45 to 50 watts of output powering this 12-volt refrigerator. Now, I just plugged it in, so it's working very hard trying to bring the temperature from about 63 degrees, it says right there, down to its set temperature of 35 degrees. You can run power via DC while you're charging it. So that makes it very handy when you're trying to top off your power station while still wanting to run your 12-volt refrigerator inside of your vehicle. Of course, this is the draw when the compressor is working. It actually works only about 20 minutes per hour with an idle that's under 5 watts for the rest of the time once you've reached your set temperature. But that means you don't have to run a splitter or anything weird like that. This has one 12-volt accessory port in the back, and I can run that to the River Pro 700, get it charging, and then run another 12-volt accessory like this refrigerator off of the River Pro at the same time. The River Pro 700 also accepts up to 200 watts of solar through its built-in multi-PowerPoint tracking controller. This is a 120 watt panel from Bluetti, which I can use because EcoFlow includes an industry standard MC4 to XT60 cable. Input maxes out at 25 volts and 12 amps, which means that you must connect multiple solar panels in parallel, not series. Parallel connectors are not included, but you can get them from EcoFlow or on Amazon as they are universal and extremely common. I'm getting about 83 watts of solar right now, which is hard to see due to the flicker induced by the effective shutter speed of my camera in bright sunlight. You don't see this flickering at all with the naked eye. What you do see with the naked eye is everything the display is trying to show you, even in bright sunlight. LCD screens on other power stations I have are almost completely useless outdoors without shading them with your hand, making this a much appreciated feature of EcoFlow power stations. As I've already started to show, the River Pro outputs look typical, but they're actually better than many other power stations this size. It has 3 AC outlets to provide 120 volts and up to 600 watts total. That can be 600 watts to just one outlet too. It doesn't mean 200 watts max to each outlet. It also has a surge rating of 1200 watts to start electric motors like on some power tools or to power something like a toaster. Basically, if it peaks at less than 10 amps draw but isn't sensitive to voltage, the River Pro should be able to handle it. This is a less common way of providing a boost in watts, so you really want to test anything out before relying on the River Pro to power it. EcoFlow has a list of what they think it can handle to give you an idea before buying one and finding out it won't work for your particular needs. It's still a 720 watt battery, so you have to keep that in mind when thinking of running high draw loads regardless. You won't get a lot of time out of a portable heater, for example, though you might be able to get a full day of work from a moderate size hammer drill. EcoFlow has larger power stations that are much more appropriate for running something like this full-size freezer, but the River Pro 700 does just fine with this one. The value of the food it stores might even be more than the cost of the River Pro 700, which is why we have a gas generator that can power a whole house, but not everyone wants to deal with that, and that's not even an option for people who live in apartments, for example. If you buy this power station to run smaller stuff, it's good to know that in a pinch, it could protect your perishables long enough for a brief power outage to end, or for you to figure out some other way to keep everything from going bad. What we're seeing is 147 watts output with the compressor on in this full-size freezer. It's not going to be always on. I actually had to press a button to force the compressor to come on because it kind of idles at about 2 watts. Your average draw is going to be much less than what this maximum output is. This is 4 hours at 80% charge, so roughly 5 hours with a full charge. You can see the output's already dropping as the compressor is starting to cool the interior of the freezer. With a 4-hour estimated runtime at 80% charge, we're looking at 5 hours with a full charge, but that would be if the compressor was running at this power the whole time, which it's not going to do. It's going to get the interior temperature to the set temperature, and then it will idle, and it idles at about 2 watts in between runs of the compressor. So that's actually pretty handy to know. It will run a full-size freezer. The irony is that the most common uses of power stations like these is to basically take the charge in this big battery and put it into several smaller batteries like a laptop or a phone or even a smaller power bank. But you can also use a setup like this to keep something with another big battery charged while off-grid, like this Rad Power e-bike, depending on how much sun you have. This e-bike's battery is 672 watt hours, which is nearly everything you're going to get from this when it's fully charged. However, you aren't likely to need to charge the bike from empty to full every day. If you have a good solar input where you're camping and you charge your bike in the morning, you should be able to get an hour or two of riding in every day and still end up with a full power station by sunset to power your overnight needs. This also allows you to take advantage of the much faster on-grid charging of the River Pro than your typical e-bike battery. You grab the charge you need from grid power with the River Pro, then you add it to the e-bike back at your campsite where you'll have more time. This is not efficient in power, but it can be much more efficient with your time, whether you're charging the power station with solar or the grid. The DC outputs look typical, but in addition to getting an 18-watt fast charge USB-A port, the USB-C port tops out at 100 watts. That'll fast charge even large, power-hungry laptops like a 16-inch MacBook Pro. This is a new 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro here. This tops out at 60 watts. By the way, Apple charges $79 for their 96-watt USB-C power supply to give you some perspective on how valuable this output level is to many people. This came in handy when my daughter and I took a road trip 2 weeks ago. She did remote school in the car, and her laptop's battery was drained well before the day was over. I had this sitting on the floor in the back seat, and she just plugged right into the USB-C port when she needed to. It's an easy fix for a vehicle that has no built-in high wattage USB-C ports. The DC socket will supply up to 13.6 volts at up to 10 amps, which means it'll push up to 130 watts if you have a 12-volt accessory that requires that much juice. I don't, so I can't show that. It also has these two DC 5521 outlets, which supply 13.6 volts at up to 3 amps, though I also don't have anything that uses them to show them off. 720 watt hours not enough for you? You can add another 720 watt hours for only $399, connected with this port right here. Both batteries are then managed by the River Pro's battery management system. That's less than 56 cents per watt hour, which is really inexpensive for a plug-and-play system like this. That's pretty slick because when you know you don't need that much capacity, you can just take this with you and not have to lug all 32 pounds with you. When you do need the extra capacity, you're finding room for 2 small boxes instead of 1 big box, which might make organizing your gear a little easier. With or without the expansion battery, everything is managed through this LCD screen. It's nice and bright so you can see it outdoors, unlike the screen on a lot of other power stations, but it turns off when you want it to, so it's not lighting up your whole tent or van while you're trying to sleep. As I've already touched on, it displays time remaining to full charge when charging, or as in this case, time remaining to empty when discharging, which means you don't have to do the math in your head. There's one other feature that sets this power station apart from most others in this price range, and it's given away by this little icon right here. The River Pro can be controlled via an app over Wi-Fi. This app is way more useful than I thought it would be, in part because it gives you access to settings you don't have on the River Pro 700 itself. Of course, you see input and output watts as well as capacity, but you also see current battery temperature and remaining battery time down to the minute, whether you are net charging or net discharging. You can control the built-in LED light, as well as power on and off the AC and DC outlets. Submenus let you change the AC frequency, as well as turn on and off the X-Boost feature.
feature, you can set a maximum state of charge, which is helpful when preparing the power station for long-term storage or when using it as an uninterruptible power supply to extend the life of the battery, because in both cases, lithium-ion batteries don't like to sit at full charge for long periods of time. You can also control how long the station will stay on when not in use, but even more important than that, you can control how long the LCD stays lit after the last time you press a button or plug something in. That is great for use in a tent or a vehicle because you can set it as low as 10 seconds, just enough time for you to see the info you want to see before returning your night to darkness so you can sleep. You can also turn off the cooling fan, which can be noisy in small spaces, though keep in mind that could shorten the life of the battery. It's nice to be able to make that choice for yourself though. You can also update the firmware on the power station itself. I don't know how frequently EcoFlow pushes out updates, but there was an update ready for it when I first got this powered up. You don't need to be connected to the same network to monitor your power station, which means you can leave this charging in one location while keeping an eye on it in another, as long as you both have internet access. For example, I took a walk in my neighborhood while watching it fast charge.
At only $649 MSRP for the River Pro 700 and only $399 MSRP for the plug and play 720 watt-hour expansion battery, you're looking at what is probably the best bang for the buck out there, especially when you're considering this is a brand name company that backs their products with a 3-year warranty. EcoFlow really sets the bar high for what you can get from a 720 watt-hour power station or 440 watt-hours combined with the expansion battery. And that's before you add in features like the fast charging and app control. If you're interested in getting any EcoFlow product, be sure to use the link in the video description to do so. It helps support the channel when you do. Be sure to subscribe for more videos on power stations like this River Pro 700. I really appreciate you watching The Tech of Tech, and I hope to see you next time.